Please listen carefully.
Welcome back to the Focus Target Podcast. This is your host, Smiley, with me as always, Van and Shy. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, sir.
Sorry,
What is player?
my face is really white. Everything's really white. There's kind of a glare. There's not much I can do about it. There's a window right in front of me that doesn't have any blinds, so it'll probably go down as it gets a little bit darker throughout the episode. But yeah, it is what it is today. So sorry, I look like some kind of weird zombie, like I'm in Michael
You
Jackson.
look like Senator Palpatine. Should put
Oh, you don't want me to do my Senator
Compliment right
Palpatine. I'd love to do that impression for you. I'll see if I can set that up at some point. Okay, today on the Focus Target Podcast, episode 90, season 3, we are going to talk about free will. We don't perhaps have a choice about it. Either it'll happen or it won't. And whether or not this is our choice or the destiny of this podcast.
Is it up to us?
We will get into that. But before we do, as always, we like to talk about our question of the day. And today's question of the day, we've talked a lot about various things on this podcast. Obviously, we started as a video game podcast. We've talked about movies. We've talked about TV shows a little bit. We've talked about video games and sports and all sorts of stuff, philosophy. We haven't really talked about music a whole lot. In fact, it's something that I feel like we haven't talked about even as friends that much. Like I know some of the stuff you guys listen to, but like I don't even really know that much about your musical interests. So we may have to do like a more fleshed out musical themed podcast as we go at some point in the future. But I thought today for a question of the day we could do just kind of a high level, what is your favorite band or musical artist or whatever. We talked about last time a little bit Shy getting into the musical instrument that now I can't remember what cello.
The
Used to be a
cello.
cellist.
Yes.
Oboe.
And so kind of got us thinking about bands and music and stuff like that. So let's start with our little cellist up here. That's Mr. Shy. Shy, favorite band or musical artist?
I think favorite's very hard. I love music,
It is.
but I'm picking one.
hard
I'm picking one. I
question.
think you're right. I think we need to do a podcast on this someday. Like, just really dig into what we like. So the one that came to mind is, I don't know, do either of you guys use Spotify or are Spotify users? So I've been a premium subscriber for a long time. For almost as long as they probably have offered it. I love Spotify. And so what they do, one thing they've done recently over the last few years is at the end of the year, they do the spotlight of like your most played song for the year, your most played artist, like your most most played artists, your 5 most played albums. Like, and it's like,
So
it runs you through all this stuff.
It tells you who your favorite is.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, and every once in a while, I don't think it was tied to that, but every once in a while it will get, and I don't know, Van, if you've had this happen with bands, but I don't think it was tied to that, but once I got a notification that a certain band, I was in the top 5% of the listeners on Spotify for that band. The band was Sum 41. So what's odd about Sum 41 is I liked them in high school, but I liked like 3 songs of theirs. I was never really a big fan of like whole albums as like a teenager. Like I liked singles off of albums, and like I loved punk rock, but with Sum 41, I liked the Hell song. I liked Still Awaiting, like certain ones of their songs were really upbeat. And I'd make playlists with that and Blink-182, whatever. But when I got out of high school, like, I don't know if any of you guys ever followed Sum 41 or followed them post their pop punk days, they started releasing kind of more like punk, like harder rock punk albums. And one of the ones that I listen to a ton is an album called Screaming Bloody Murder. And it's just such an interesting album. I think, first of all, I think it's really well done. It's just really good, like, fusion of like punk, like speed with like rock elements, so like kind of like heavy riffs but like at a fast pace. And so I think it's really a good listen, but also it involves, I don't know the background, I've never looked into the story of the album. A lot of times these albums, bands have like reasons they write something, but the album, and coming from me, I think is a very interesting thing. It deals with, I think, a lot of like disenchantment of the band with religion. And so, for instance, there's like a song on the album called like Holy Image of Lies. And the whole song is about, I think, the cross and how it's basically a lie. And the album's just very interesting to listen to from my perspective, to listen to someone who has like felt like they've been lied to by the church or lied to by religion or let down by, religious messages. And so I don't know, like that's just an album I like to go back to and listen to and just kind of get a different perspective from the perspective that I have, and just kind of listen to how other people feel like about the things that I think about, but from the other side. So would highly recommend it. It's not maybe an easy album to listen to, but like I said, it definitely rocks out, and I think it's well done.
All right, I mean that's a good answer. I never would have guessed that if you give me 100 guesses, I don't know that I'd have gotten into Sum 41. So that's good to know. What about you,
Would you
Van?
have even thought about Sum 41?
I probably wouldn't. I probably haven't
Right.
since
So then,
for a long time.
do you really have any free will if you can't even think of Sum 41, given a million times to try?
Nice.
You know. Anyway, I'll just take it next, and I'll explain that in a second. It makes more sense than you think, but I'll explain in a second. I can see Shai laugh because he knows where I'm going with this. That's awesome though. I haven't listened to Sum 41 since high school, so I just looked at it. I just looked it up right now and added it to my Spotify playlist. And we should rival that. We should do a hip hop music thing, and we'll call it Spotify. And we'll play hip hop music.
Well, with all of our music production and distribution experience, we'll start our own streaming platform.
Dude, if Kanye can do it, come on.
There you go.
With all the minimal resources he has. But I wouldn't have thought to go back to Sum 41. I mean, I just looked at the album. The album you're talking about is 2011. Anyway, my favorite artist, band, albums, whatever you would want to call it, is the band called Tool. It's a very well-known band, and not many people listen to it. But it's and okay, so I don't know how to explain this. A lot of people know about it. More people know about it who listen to it. The ones who listen to it are extremely passionate about it. So it's almost like a cult following.
Yes, that matches my experience. Yes.
Yeah.
People who love Tool love Tool.
Like love Tool, and I'm one of those persons who like loves Tool. So just the musicality behind their songs, their riffs, like I feel like I can tell a good band by a song that doesn't need to fill in every single moment with lyrics. And like a lot of people lean on lyrics for their catchiness, their to remember the song by and all that stuff. And I think of bands like Metallica and Tool and all these other bands that have like long intermissions, right? Led Zeppelin, things like that, where it's not all about singing all the time, and you can actually just enjoy the music and the guitars and the drumming and all that stuff. And that really sings to me as a drummer and guitarist and everything like that. I just like to listen to the music sometimes. Like, you don't have to sing just to fill in the gaps and make a good song. And Tool does this all the time. Like, their last album, they got, plenty of 11, 12, 15-minute songs. And there's probably 2 minutes of vocals. And, the rest is like just all music. And of course, it varies by song. But just the things that they are able to do musically is just amazing to me. They're changing beats in the middle of the songs, right? So like most 99% of the songs that are out there right now are 4/4, right? So 4-bar 4 measures, and that's what we normally do. 1 2 3 4, 2 2 3 4, 3 3 4 4. They'll throw in like 7/8, 14 15ths. They'll do like all this crazy stuff, but keep it to a point where, like, when you come back to the riff again, it all made sense and felt right, even though it was like offbeat at the time and uncomfortable to hear this one snapshot. Like, it's crazy. Like, you can tell how passionate I am about this. I'm one of those persons who loves Tool. But no, just musically, their riffs are amazing. They're genius. Their latest album really is their swan song. It was like a decade between albums, and they just put this album out, and it is like everything that I expected Tool to be, and I don't know how they top it, to be honest. The most recent album is just absolutely incredible.
All right. Well, again, not a band I would have expected. Not a guess I would have made given 100.
So do you really have free will? Yeah.
Nice. Was that your tie-in, or are we coming back to that tie-in later?
No, we'll come back later.
All right.
I don't even know your message, and I'm already ready to argue against it. So that'll be good. This will be a good podcast.
You're destined to argue with Van forever.
I'm not going to go nearly as deep as either you guys did. I think for me it was hard because, I mean, my go-to answer for my favorite band has always been Say Anything. and I do enjoy their music quite a bit. But I feel like I've kind of drifted away from them a little bit. They were very important in my life for a while. That like their albums got me through some hard times. Um, and so now I'm trying to think, like like I don't really have a good answer. Like I feel like there's been phases of my life where I've had different favorite bands, and they've kind of changed over time. I would say in high school, Third Eye Blind was probably the band that I would define as my favorite, and is still, in the top 10 for me. I think in college and a little bit, into college and into my, like the Final Fantasy 11 heyday, if you will. Um, it was all about saying anything, and now I feel like I've gotten a lot more into classic rock of late. I would say my favorite band of the moment is probably Steely Dan. Steely Dan is freaking amazing, and just all their songs are just phenomenal. So yeah, I think we definitely, it'd be interesting to have a deeper podcast about this and go a little bit deeper into that. I think I could go a little bit broader, but yeah, I don't really have a good answer. So
Can I suggest a lightning round really quick? Follow up for the
sure.
question of the day. Really quick, name a band you feel like would be the other, like each other podcast member's favorite band, and I'll start to get us going.
Oh no, I need to think
Oh,
about
really?
that.
I know, no, it's gotta be off the top of your head. Off the top of your
It's
head.
lightning
All
it,
right.
though.
Yeah,
Off the
yeah.
top.
All right.
Alright.
And I've had time to think
Alright.
about it, so it's not fair. But Van, what's the Baby Metal? Smiley, My Chemical
Yeah,
Romance.
that's an easy one. Ooh, MCR. I see it.
I love MCR. I've listened to it quite a
Yeah,
bit.
I don't think that's super far off.
Songs are
We've talked about it, so
really
yeah,
up.
yeah.
I'm gonna go Blink 182 Shy, probably because you mentioned it, so it's fresh in my head. And then Smiley, I'm going Biggie Smalls.
Oh yeah, Notorious. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Notorious.
Yeah, love Biggie. I was, when it comes to rappers, it's hard too. It's hard to like, I got my
Oh,
Mount Rushmore
dude, how do you
rappers, but
go? How do you
it's
go
tough.
between
It's tough.
yeah rapper? Oh my God,
We
Biggie.
do a
You
whole,
got Tupac.
we do a whole,
You
we do
got
a whole
Busta
podcast
Rhymes.
on
You
that.
got
Oh,
shoot.
love Busta Rhymes. That's right. That's right. Yeah, for Van, I would have said probably. It must be. It's probably the. It's. I probably would have said like Dre, like Dr. Dre, just probably because of
Mm.
the Los Angeles connection. Like
First album I ever bought in my entire life. My dad made me take it back a week later.
Which one? Chronic, the original Chronic,
Chronic album. Yep.
the first Chronic.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
It was.
Rolling
I
in
got
my
to listen to it
six
for a
so
week. Listen to it for a week.
And for Shy, I don't know what I feel like Shy listens to. I like Switchfoot maybe. I don't know.
There was a day. There was a day when I liked Switchfoot. Yeah.
Yellow Card?
There's nothing wrong with Switchfoot.
No,
Like
they're
they're
solid
all
band.
right.
Their early stuff was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, listen, that one song that they were meant to live, I think. That song still jams
That
even
was
to this
aight.
day. Like
Yeah.
that song's good. All right.
MXPX?
Yeah. So obviously, they're all right. Yeah, they had some good songs.
It looks like an MXPX though. Shy.
MXPX was
Shy,
that's
yeah.
more punk. I don't know. I definitely lean more towards like pop punk or like punk rock. Like MXPX, I think is more like traditional
K-pop?
punk where it's like rougher. I've never really got into like the
Yeah.
rougher punk, like Ramones and stuff like that, like classic punk. I never really got into that very
Rancid.
like yeah,
Yeah,
whoever
got it.
that is. Yeah.
You know what Rancid is?
That's like one of the
They're
like
they're
the
OG.
baby metal
They're
punk.
they're OG.
I'm not allowed in the music podcast.
Time on? No. Okay. Well, obviously there's clearly we could fill some time on this topic. So, so you guys, if you want to hear more about our musical predilections, you can look forward to that. Okay. Free will, the free will topic. Let's get into it. So, I mean, probably doesn't need to be defined, but they're just to level set what we're talking about here. We kind of have two traditionally in philosophy. There's kind of two overarching viewpoints that have kind of taken polar positions. One, the idea of determinism, which means that is kind of everything you've ever heard about fate, predestination. That whether it's due to God or due to some other force, destiny or whatever, that everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen was already planned and couldn't have ever happened any other way. And we're just basically actors playing out a role on a cosmic scale. And that though we feel like we're making choices, those choices are actually just illusions. We feel like they're choices, but really they are not. That everything that happens couldn't have happened any other way than it ever has, and same is true going forward. The other side of that is more obvious, like free will, like that when I decide tonight whether we're going to go to Chicken Shack or Chicken Slims, that choice comes down to me, and the future is unwritten until I make the decision. Um, so, I think. Quick question to start: do you think that if we polled all of humanity, do you think? And well, maybe that's not fair because
there's like cultural differences that are
yes, let's take
unknown.
America just since that's where we are. If
America.
we polled everybody in America. What percentage do you think believes in free will? Van? Just ballpark. If you had to guess, like, how many people do you think believe in free will versus predestination? If they had to pick one or the other,
If they had to pick, because a lot of people jump back and forth, and I'm sure we'll talk
sure,
about that.
or just are like, I don't know, I don't care.
I think if they had a gun to their head and they had to pick, I would say somewhere around 90% believe in free will.
What do you think, Shai?
I would say between 80 to 90%. I think it's a.
You have the answer?
It's a
Have you
weird.
looked this up?
So no, I didn't. I don't know. Is there polling on that? I mean, I guess
I'm sure there is. I'm gonna check
people.
it out.
People do polls for everything.
I guess see what you can find. But well, it's interesting because I am also would have guessed 80 to 90% would say they believe in free will. I think they're like really in their heart of hearts believe in free will. Like I think most people, there's a little bit of a nihilistic element to determinism, right? That like if everything's fated and your choices don't matter, what are we even doing here, right?
All right, so credit to David, and I apologize for bastardizing the name, Wisniewski, Robert Deutschlander, and John Doyle Haynes for their journal entry.
You really butchered his last name.
Deutschlander?
Well, I mean, it's like Deutschlander. Sorry, Deutschlander.
That's much better. Hailing from the doucheland.
Zoolander 3, Douchelander.
Anyway, they had a journal entry where they did some polling. Okay. And their results were, dang it, I just lost it. It's actually in line with what we thought for some reason.
Nice. Which
is pretty interesting. Somewhere around 83% is what I saw. Let's see here. Dualism. Okay. With the beliefs according to three. Okay. In the U.S., a majority did believe in free will. 82.3%.
Okay.
Nice.
There you go.
All right. So that's cool. But
sorry, Deutschlander.
Our apologies. But so what do you guys think? Are you along with the average Americans, or do you have a different viewpoint? I know Van's been chomping at the bit to talk about why me only having 100 guesses sometimes constitutes a lack of free will. So let's just get into it. Let's just get into it, Van. Let's hear it. What do you got? What do you believe? What do you believe? And like, if you're going to espouse somebody else's viewpoint, let's save that for later. But I want to know what you personally believe in your heart of hearts. If you're not ready for that, we can come back to you.
Yeah, so we have to have a different definition of free will for me to express what I genuinely believe.
Let's lay it out. Go ahead.
I believe, and see, I mean, everything's a derivative of somebody else's view, right? But I'm not going to quote their view in my answer.
Of course, right? Yeah, absolutely.
But I believe we have free choice. Right, you were talking about dinner, right? Going to KFC or going to Popeyes. I believe we have free choice. I don't necessarily believe we. I know that's not what you said, but those things like similar thing. You choose between what dinner you want to eat tonight, right? I could choose between what drink I want in the fridge.
Yeah.
Yep.
But as far as like 100% undirected free will, I do not believe that exists. But I also don't believe there's a higher power pulling the strings to getting you one player to another.
So you believe, let me see if I understand this right. You believe that you have some wiggle room of choice, but in a general like kind of like you're maybe like in the analogy of a river where you can paddle a little bit and avoid
Yeah,
rocks and
that's a good
stuff in the river,
analogy.
but you can't get out of the river. You're
That's actually a
going where the
very good
river's taking
analogy.
you. Okay, so
Yes. Yeah.
what is the river then? If it's
Yeah.
especially if it's not God, what what is it and what is the purpose? Like
Your
why
consciousness and your mind, your thoughts. And I got to explain that more
Like your
so.
personality? Is that what you mean?
A personality could be part of it, yeah. So basically all these things that I don't have the free will to change who I am, right? So one example of me not
okay,
having free
okay, sure.
will is the fact that I can't like um I don't like mango. I can't like mango no matter what I do. I cannot like mango, right? So I don't have the free will to like mango. That's a very simple thing you think you should have, and I don't, based on my personality, taste
Good
buds, my
point.
mind's
Yeah.
perception of mango, something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't have that free will there. So your river analogy was actually pretty good. But so
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was
But that's kind of like the foundation of my beliefs.
Let me run something by you and see if you agree with this, because I heard someone the other day make the comment he was a dad, and he said that when his children were born, pretty quickly he could tell their personalities, and like as they grow up, like like he wasn't talking about free will particularly, but like we think he like there's so much emphasis in our culture, I think, in like development and like change and growth, but like he's like I can look at my kids like early on and pretty much look at them now and be like, yeah, I mean that's Frank. He's been the same. So like almost like that idea that like when you're born, like your genetics, everything's like you're you then, and then like you said, you can't really. There's things you can't change. You're just kind of.
Yes, that's 100% in line with my thinking and experience as well. Yeah, there's been studies that go so far into your genome to state like even what college you go to is infinitely less important than the genes you're already born with in you being a successful individual or not, right? You don't have to go to the best college necessarily, and they do these studies on twins or whatnot that have the same genome. One goes to college, the other one doesn't, but then like you do like these post adulthood tests, and like they're pretty matched as far as successful lives and all those kind of things that we could measure, money and things like that. So it's pretty interesting. But yeah, that exact thing is kind of where I feel like we're pigeonholed into not a true, genuine, 100% liberal free will.
All right, that's surprisingly not that far off from what I believe. Mine goes a little bit different way, but there's definitely some echoes there. So I did not expect that. That's interesting. What about you, Shai? Let's go to you next, though. What kind of free will versus predestination beliefs do you carry with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was exposed to kind of that idea recently. That kind of idea, like almost of like psychological determinism or like developmental determinism. I had never really thought of that before, so I find that very intriguing, and I don't not believe that it doesn't play a part in our lives. I don't believe in. I would say I agree with you guys. I don't believe in 100% free will. I believe maybe in a little bit less free will than you guys do, because I do, coming from a biblical perspective, believe in a higher power that is that does step in and make changes to people's behavior, and the Bible talks about this, and I don't know if this would be the time to get into that or if that's later, but like I mean there's there's specific, so I mean like I think like one of the more like poster child passages from the Bible that covers this is when Moses came to Egypt to rescue the Hebrews from slavery. There's multiple times that he, there's the 10 plagues that he brings upon Egypt to demonstrate God's power and to convince Pharaoh to release the Hebrews. And there's several times after those plagues, especially some of the more obvious ones, where it says, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so there's this statement of God actually affecting someone's thought process, their emotions, whatever, in order, and the the interpretation is that in order that his power could be shown to a greater degree to ancient civilizations, to the Hebrew people, he's about to bring them out into the wilderness, and he needs to make sure they can trust him, and so he's really, really demonstrating his power for them to see. And so I think that's an example. I think like along the same lines, talking about Christianity, there's a whole discussion even in Christianity of free will versus like you mentioned the word predestination. This becomes a big conversation with the idea that there are opposing views as to whether God chooses those he wants to save, or whether humans can actually choose God. And that's a whole theological discussion, whether we even have the ability to choose to follow God, or if he has chosen us from the beginning. And we just go into that. So yeah.
So you believe then, similar, I guess, to Van in a way, you believe that there's some choice that you have some free will, but ultimately there's a higher power that could step in and alter things.
Yeah, I don't think that like I think, and this is where it gets weird, like I think that like yeah. I don't think that if I choose to take a drink of water right now that like God decided that I would do that.
I was like, no, 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 not soda.
Um
Have the water tonight.
but I think, well, I'm even just like reach and take a sip in a moment. I think that there are either things in my life that maybe God, I don't know as far as like the minutia. I do think
But do you think it like higher levels, like as far as like life changing decisions,
I think
that God
sometimes
plays a role in that?
I think to maybe to a certain extent, I think to a certain extent also, I think specifically that conversation of whether like when it comes to like making a decision whether you're going to follow God or not. I think that more recently that has become a bigger discussion in my mind. Whereas before, when I was younger, I've been like, no, like we as people choose. I think that less and less I feel that way. I will say too, like I also would say that God is outside of time. And so like I would say that he knows everything that is going to happen. But that doesn't take away like our free choices either. And so like he might know everything I'm going to do, even to the smallest minutia, but that doesn't mean that I can't choose to do that. And that may be, I think that often in Christian circles, when you talk about free will, that gets brought in a lot of times. It's like, well, if people have free will, then God's not all knowing, because that's like an attribute of God. But I mean, I don't think that they are. I don't think free choice and omniscience are in conflict.
Mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. I to get into I've kind of been refining this one over some time. I've given it a lot of thought, and I think um, that there's, going back to what I said earlier, you have to have a bit of a pragmatic outlook at life, even if you don't believe in free will necessarily. Um, you know, but but I believe that 0%, is that coming through? Is that coming through as a zero? Is the amount of free will that we have. Actually, I believe in true 100% predestination, not at the hands of God or a god or a pantheon of gods, not because of any like cosmic destiny like karma or fate or anything like that, but simply through the repercussions of cause and effect at a level that we cannot perhaps perceive. And so this gets a little bit into what Van was talking about your personality. But the way I look at it is that every choice that everybody makes that's ever made is made due to a variety of factors, right? And so when we think about choice, right, we think about like, okay, let's get back to the dinner discussion. Van is trying to decide tonight between KFC and Popeyes. To me, that's not even a choice. You always go Popeyes 100% of the time, but to each their own. Right? He's up in the air. KFC and Popeyes. He doesn't. Oh boy, he could really. He just feels like his soul is split. He doesn't know what he wants, but he decides to go with KFC. We're going KFC tonight. All right, we're going. We feel, because in the moment we're so conflicted, that like really that was a toss of a coin. It was really randomness perhaps that decided that in the end. That given that moment over and over again, I could have chosen differently. But I don't believe that's true. I believe that even no matter how tight of a call it was for you, there's a reason you made the choice you did. And if you're given that exact same circumstance and nothing is different, you will always make that choice 100% of the time, because you did make that choice. And so if you're in the exact same circumstance and nothing changes, there's no reason that you would go a different way. The problem with this is that a lot of times the reason we make these choices are subconscious, right? Is because like we don't know, maybe. And so on a different day, in a different set of circumstances, we might make a different choice. But all of our choices are based on either something in our personality, something in our genetics, perhaps something in just the way we're feeling. You know, the temperature of the room we're in may make one thing sound more appealing than the other in that moment. But there's all these causes that are causing us to make these choices. And so because of that, I feel like every decision that's ever been made has been made because of cause and effect down the line. And what I was getting into earlier was that from a pragmatic standpoint, we have to remember that, like, just because that's true, like, that's not a reason to, like, lose hope or whatever, or feel like you don't have any power. Like, choice, whether choice is an illusion or not, like, you still have to take accountability for yourself. Like, that's the way the world has success. And so I don't want to give the wrong message here, but I truly believe that there's a reason that everything happens, and it's not like a weird cosmic reason. It's just because, like, if you could see all the inputs, all the stimuli inputs to every decision that's ever been made, it's like a calculation basically. And you could, if we had all the data, we could 100% predict every choice that any person makes. If we had all the factors, like, we could tally that up and see, oh, of course he's going to do this and here's why. We just don't have access to that data currently as a species. What do you guys think of
Yeah,
that?
I mean,
Blow your
I
mind.
agree with it. So I've heard that same exact viewpoint. So I'm familiar with it,
Okay.
and it is a very very strong one, and it's one that I certainly could agree with
I was gonna say, well, it
almost
was
completely.
surprisingly close to what you were saying. Like,
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
espoused yours, I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of the same idea, really, when you get right
right.
down to it. Mine's maybe a little bit harder, a little bit
Yeah,
more
and you're
focused,
taking
but
external factors, which are true factors,
right.
into decision making. And
Yes,
like you mentioned, temperature, absolutely, that can certainly be a reason why you would choose one thing or another. And that's like not even a percentile of the decision making factors.
right.
So
Absolutely.
external,
Yeah,
internal, everything. What happened a month ago could have been one of those factors.
absolutely.
Anything,
Yeah,
any amount of
yeah.
information or data or experience is a factor,
Yeah.
conscious or
In fact, I
subconscious.
would
And
say
I agree with that.
memory is probably the strongest factor, right? Like,
Yeah,
so much of what we do is because of how our previous experience leads to it. Like, I mean, whether I go to a place tonight for dinner is a lot based on how good it's been in the past, or how
yeah.
good the other places that I have as options have been in the past,
Yeah,
and
or even your most recent memory of it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Fear of disappointment or hope that it's going to be delicious.
Well, what about
yeah,
marketing? Like the culture we live in, where like we're
Oh,
constantly being sold stuff, we're constantly being influenced, whether it's through social media or through television. Like,
and that's where it gets a little nefarious, right? Because I believe that has a huge impact on a lot of people's decision making, a lot of times in ways that they don't even realize, that they don't even acknowledge. As I said, very subliminal, subconscious stuff that, like, and sometimes it's not even subliminal and subconscious. Like, there's times when I'm listening to a podcast and they're either talking about pizza or there's an ad for pizza or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really good. We should have pizza tonight. Like, that's pretty blatant, like, in your face. Like, think about how many things that you see. Like, I mean, that's the whole idea behind, like, movie branding, right? Like, the idea of, like, where corporations pay a lot of money to just have, you know a Coke sign in the background of a
mm-hmm.
scene in a movie, where, like, you're not even looking at it, they're not even directly marketing it to you, but just like having it there in the back, having somebody drinking or using a certain product, like, influences you in ways that you don't realize, and then impacts your decisions. And then, you know sometimes
yeah. One
even
of
in bad, good ways and bad ways. Like, sometimes you're tired of seeing something everywhere, and so it sours you on something, like, sometimes in ways
yeah,
they
I
don't even
was
expect.
watching a magician. He was talking about how mind manipulation is a huge part in pulling off illusions, which I mean, it
Sure.
sounds obvious. But the example he gave was he had a group of 30 people in front of this scene. They thought they were watching a movie set that was about to begin, and they had a car come in and ended up impacting the other car, and then drove off. And then a police officer came by and said, "Hey, this wasn't part of the movie set. This was a legitimate hit and run. I need to talk to you separately and figure out what's going on." They separated 15 people on one side, 15 people on the other side, and the cop only asked one question, and it was, how fast was the vehicle going when he rammed into the other one? How fast was the vehicle going when he bumped into the other one? When he asked how fast was he going when he bumped, they ultimately said like 10, on a scale of like 10 to 50% slower, than the
Right.
other half of the people that he asked, how fast was he going when he rammed into the car?
Right. Just
And
from
it's just a
using a different word.
simple verbiage, a simple word changed the consistent response from both groups dramatically. And it's like, damn, you start talking about witness, tampering and stuff like that. Like
Oh,
this, there's no way you can ever charge anybody for asking a question like that. But it's real, like witness influence with police officers or whatnot. Like just asking a question one way or another just absolutely influences people's answer. And I was like, that's fascinating. Like I can't even trust any question that people ask me anymore because it's going to influence my response. Like it's
Well, I think
ridiculous.
that really gets interesting. Like, I don't watch a lot of courtroom dramas, but like from what I know, like there's a lot of like like terms like leading the witness and things like that,
Yeah,
conjecture, and like that's they've had to hone that stuff to a science because you can do so much manipulation when people's lives are on the line.
it it's funny because it's something I've noticed lately that they never used to do this. But I watch a lot of like post game interviews
Mm.
and stuff with hockey, and like in before they would just ask, what'd you think of tonight's game, coach, or whatever. But like now they really like lead their questions. It's like, how excited were you to see your team perform
yeah,
like this? And it's like, don't tell him how excited he is. Like,
right,
let him tell it. Like, it always kind of like, puts me off a little bit. And like,
yeah,
I think it is a lot of like what you're saying is like they've probably found that by inserting some of those words into their question, they get more of the kind of response that they're looking for, and not like just bland answers to these
yeah,
questions, right? So interesting stuff for sure.
yeah. Exactly. And so take those two groups for example, and this will tie right back to free will, or if you will. Take those two groups. They both think 100%, or I can imagine, or I would imagine they both think 100% that they can choose any number they want. They could choose any number they want as far as speed goes, right, from that car that impacted it. And yet this one consistently chose lesser, and this one consistently chose higher. But both groups, I guarantee you, felt 100% that they can choose any number they want, and yet they were influenced externally, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that. Well, I mean that goes. This is getting a little bit far afield, but it reminds me a little bit of 1984. If anybody's read that, which I hope you have. If you haven't, you should. Um,
Certainly a book that people should be
Relevant,
familiar with right now. Yes.
applicable in many ways, yes, to our current society. But one of the things I always found very fascinating about that book is that one of the aims of the party, who was trying to basically keep people under control, was to actually trim down the number of words in the language to like the bare minimum, to like make it impossible. Like the goal was to make it impossible to even express the idea of anything that they did not want you to be able to express. Which it kind of ties into that, like when you think about how powerful words actually are, and it's not something I think people think about that much. But yeah, read
Yeah. So
1984. Do you want a book recommendation for me? Um, Go ahead.
I mean, I think that just completely the example I gave, and of course it's a single data point, but that example completely supports your theory that it's your responses or your answers, your choices are a byproduct of your experience or of your environment, right? And in that case,
Yeah,
they were in the
internal and
environment
external.
where the
Yep.
cop said something and the other one said something else. Yep.
Yep. All right. Any other? So, do we want to get into any other? Maybe this gets back to Vans, and maybe you've already kind of gotten into it here. But is there any other kind of philosophical viewpoints that, whether maybe you don't particularly believe in it, but that you want to talk about, that maybe kind of intersects here with where we're going?
I I'd actually like to hear more about Shai's um I guess what you were saying, how God can interfere or not interfere, but can direct or
Intervene.
guide
Yeah.
a decision. Yeah, intervene. And then you had mentioned that like, oh, I don't think God's telling me to take the sip of water, right? That's probably like neuron synapses and stuff saying your body's just telling you you're thirsty or whatnot. Um, and I feel like I give credit to Smiley's theory, right? Which I admittedly mostly align to, but that doesn't mean that yours can't exist either, right? Because that was a small snapshot on what there's what. So going back to the car accident, like why would God intervene and give them the number that it's supposed to be? That's a nuance thing, right? So
Yeah.
although he can, so I just think it's interesting that both of those, it doesn't disprove one or the other,
Yeah, I don't
and
think
both of them
so.
can exist in that universe.
I don't think that one is dependent on the other either, though. So
Yeah.
they can be, like you said, they're not mutually exclusive, but they don't have to. They're also not exclusive. Yeah, I think the foundation of the Christian belief would be the idea that God kind of has, like, when he created existence at the beginning outside of himself, that he had a plan going forward. And so, like, the Bible is a portion of that plan. At the end, it gets into apocalyptic literature, which gets kind of funky and maybe not literal. So we don't maybe know exactly what, like, we kind of know what the end of the plan is, but there's, like, it's talks about a history, talks through a lot of history as far as the Old Testament and New Testament, but then at the end it's like, and then this is like the end, but there's all this unknown. But the idea that God kind of had a plan and he directed history throughout. So, like I mentioned with Moses, I think, like I mentioned with, like, well, I didn't mention, but like the flood would be a good example of that. Like, the flood would be an example of God moving the world and creation in a certain direction, like like a clean slate on the earth and starting fresh. And so just there being situations where, like, whether through miracles or through influencing people's decisions, he's directing a plan to a final point. And that no matter, whether you believe in free will or determinism, or determinism outside of sovereign determinism, that free will and non-sovereign determinism can't ultimately overrule God's sovereignty in accomplishing his plan. I think that would be the ultimate. And yet on the flip side, I feel like in my mind, whether or not God could be influencing every little decision we make at every second of the day, that just seems, I don't know, that seems unnecessary to me.
Why would he have created people at that
exactly, and that's the whole. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's weird because I think I understand where Smiley's come from. I don't disagree with that either. I think that it's weird to think of what we view as maybe a free choice as being determined by something else, because we don't consciously make that choice taking in those deterministic viewpoints. So whether or not it was determined, you know what I mean? Like, I think you get into some really gray areas there where it's not like you're not taking all that into account. You are in your mind saying, well, pizza or Chick-fil-A. Well, let's do Chick-fil-A. Like, it just sounds good, Like, we did pizza yesterday, which that might be more of a deterministic decision because you're basing it off a previous choice right there. But, like, you're making it as a free choice in your mind. So there's even that idea of, like, maybe perception of free will versus determinism that can play a part.
Well, and so that kind of brings me to the next conversation I want to have, which is, so, like, I agree that, I don't believe that our choices are really have anything to do, not anything to do. Like, we obviously have some input on it, like, but, like, the reasons that we think the way we do are a product of a lot of different factors. I've already gone over that, but, like, there is still that perception. Like, it still feels like you're making a choice. It still feels like even if I truly am a slave to, like, the many factors that go into it, I don't feel confined. I feel like if I want to get up and leave this podcast right now, I could do that, and maybe I will, just to prove a point. And even though that would be a factor, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't change the fact that it was predestined, but it doesn't feel predestined to me. So, but what if it did? Right? What if we lost that perception? So, like, what if it was demonstrated to you? What if the next prophet of God comes down? Jesus comes back and says, "Yo, I hate to break it to you guys."
From the Matrix.
Trinity.
Just have her. No, the freaking the Oracle.
Oh, the Oracle.
Oh, the Oracle.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, all right. You don't want to use Jesus'
let's
resurrection. We'll go to the Matrix instead. All right, fine.
Well,
So,
I don't want to be blasphemous. I got to go to church Sunday.
Blasphemous talk about the resurrection
it's a
of
thought
Christ.
experiment.
That is like the tenet of Christianity.
I mean,
you're right.
God's coming back. Jesus is coming back.
That might be a bad example because that's supposedly the end of all time. That's not really like the next prophet, or maybe not the end of all time, but that's like, yeah.
Regardless, all right. Yeah. We'll keep it a little more PC. We'll go with the
end of time.
That'd be a good one. That would be a very good one. All right. So let's say exactly right. Let's say an oracle comes out and says, "Listen, here's the thing. choice is an illusion, all right, and I can prove it to you. I'm going to tell you guys whatever you want to know. I'll tell you about the future, and you can do whatever you want to try to prevent it, but you'll see that it'll come true. And, let's say that we'll get past that. We'll come back to that itself, but how would that change? Like, as a thought experiment, a good usage there. Like, how do you think that would change how your day-to-day life went if it could be proven to you that, like, really you don't have any choice whatsoever? Like, everything that happens can only happen one way, down to the tiniest detail, not at a high level, but that, like, listen, at 7:22 tonight, you're gonna take a drink of water, and it doesn't matter what you do, you're gonna take a drink of water. Like, it's gonna happen, and no matter how hard you fight against it, it ends up happening. Like, how would that affect the way you live your life if you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that fate was fate?
So I wouldn't want to believe that at all.
Right.
And I don't know, I can't explain why I wouldn't want to believe it. I think maybe because
makes you feel powerless.
Like,
makes you feel like your life is meaningless.
There's nothing. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing, right? Like, life is a series of experiences and learnings and whatnot, and yeah, you'll still have those things, but it's less meaningful in a way. I wouldn't want to believe that at all. But here's the kicker. I think that's probably more true than it's not. And the reason being is, so the future's unwritten, sort of. And if we agree that everything that Smiley says is true, right, about the series of factors and data points, and if we have a strong enough computer to take a snapshot of this exact moment in time, we know exactly what we're going to do at that time. Well, if you had that same data, and if those things do exist, you can literally play that tape forward on how everything else is going to happen, and by that point predict with 100% minuscule accuracy what the future is. So technically it hasn't happened yet, but it certainly could be mapped out in a supercomputer of some sort, and therefore would be the exact thing that you're talking about. So instead of an oracle, it's a computer doing the computation, and I think that's actually more realistic than not.
And so here's where I will. Here's kind of the paradox of it, right? I 100% agree with that, right? The problem is that, like, here's where people say, here's how I can prove it's not true, because I just wouldn't do it, right? I would put myself in a situation where I could make it impossible. And the reason that would work is because if you found out about, if somebody tells you tomorrow this is going to happen to you and you don't want it to, that's changed those inputs, right? Now you have to recalculate. You have to recalculate knowing the effect that knowledge would have on your decision making. And so now the old, like, if, like, let's say, Van, you go into a room with this computer, right? You could plot my choices and my actions with 100% accuracy as long as I never knew. But the minute you tell me what I'm going to do, that changes all the calculations. Now all your calculations are wrong because new data has been input that wasn't there before.
So this is what's really going to bake your bagels, right?
This is where you were going.
What if so the computer would know that I would have had that intent ahead of time, right? And then that computer would have predicted that I would have told you, thus predicting your actions, in my opinion.
Right. So you have to kind of go back and forth, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, it's almost like reverse psychology in a way, right? Like, trying to, like, it's like, I know that I'm going to tell you, so because you know that, I knew to tell you this, so I knew that's what you do. Yeah,
with 2 poison cups. Yeah,
very interesting stuff. What do you think, Sean?
Guys are getting into it. No, I think that I had a couple thoughts during that conversation. I think that the actions of other people make the computation machine extremely difficult. Because it's easy to say that one person maybe is determined by all these factors or whatever, but when you take 6 billion people interacting with each other and all of their factors and everything they're going through and how every single thing that happens to them then affects another person, then you take in the temperature, random temperature, and something else. Like, I mean, for one thing, I don't think there's ever a supercomputer powerful enough to, like, calculate that. It's just like the calculations are just absurd. And I think that's really where maybe you could maybe start making an argument for free will in the fact that there are just so many factors out there that are constantly potentially, interacting with each other, that as far as like predicting the future, that would be impossible. Not that the decisions you aren't the decisions you would make, but future predictions are just mathematically impossible.
So this is where I was getting, to interrupt you just real quick. This is where I was getting into that pragmatic part of it, where that, like, even though I don't believe in free will, I don't think it matters. It's just like with a computer, right? Like you guys are, I assume, are aware that like a computer cannot truly generate a random number.
Yeah.
Right. Like it doesn't have a way. It has to be coded. It's not really random, but because it's done the exact same idea, right? The computation is done at such a rate that as people we can't back into it. We can't predict it. It might as well be random to us, even though it's really not. And that's how I believe our free will is. Like our will is actually might as well be free will, because we can't ever, as you said, there's far too many inputs. And then when you multiply that by every person who is also interacting and compounding that, like there's no way you would ever be able to get to that. And so you do. It's the way you have free will the same way you have random numbers on a computer. You do, but like technically you don't, but it doesn't matter.
All right.
That's how I feel about it. So sorry.
Let me jump back into it, because there were two other thoughts I had. I want to answer your question of how would that affect your view if you knew that if something was going to happen. I think the idea, I first of all want to say that obviously I think we've all said that to a certain extent we feel like our decisions are dictated by something, and yet I think we don't go through life. I mean, I think Van said, I think you guys have both spoken on this, but we don't go through life thinking that way. So obviously, I think that to a certain extent, it's easy to live your life with that kind of underlying knowledge and not let it affect your viewpoint of life, like as far as like positive, negative, too bad. I think that if, let's say, someone were to come in and like make a prophecy, and it was like, let's say it was someone like the Oracle or someone like a biblical prophet or someone that you knew had been accurate in the past, like multiple times to a very precise degree, I think how it would affect my opinions would be based on the prophecy. I think like if their prophecy was, a week from now you're going to be dead, and it was like, oh, I'm going to be dead in a week from now, like, that would affect how I lived, and I might get depressed by that. I might, feel an urgency to do certain things in my life, or like if like they were like, in a week you're going to meet the woman of your dreams, like all of a sudden I might be like, my anticipation might be like off the charts, and my excitement, I might be like a new spring in my step. Like I think that you're like, you can be affected by something like that. Now, I think the last thing I wanted to mention was you guys made this comment about like the future computations, like setting yourself in a situation where you can't fulfill something. You're going to drink, let's say you're going to drink a cup of water. I'm going to lock myself in a room without that. I think that as a fan of films and stories, I think that one thing, coming back to the actions of others again, like not even having to say the computer has to then factor in the prophetic knowledge or whatever, and then recalculate. But I think for a lot of movies, I think of like the Final Destination movies as a great example of this. Not that those are like classics by any means, but like many times, like in those films, like there's these teenagers who like they're getting killed off, and like, well, I'm going to put myself in a situation where like I can't be hurt at all, and then it's like something still happens, like whether the room falls apart or like the actions of others. Let's say like you lock yourself in a room and your best friend shows up all of a sudden. It was a key to your apartment with a cup of water because like they like thought, oh, they must be really thirsty or something. I just had this feeling that they must really drink water, and then like in your panic to like get away from the water, you trip and the water falls and you end up like drinking water. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's just so many like variables that like I don't even think that like I think even going into this like back and forth paradox of the computer having to constantly recalculate, I think is nonsense, just because like I said earlier, like other humans bring so much variable and so much randomness potentially into the equation when you start trying to calculate that kind of timeline. I don't know if any of that made sense, but those were my thoughts.
No, I think it did.
That was funny. I was gonna say but for Smiley to be right, you only have to break it once. Right? You don't have to consistently break it. So like your example of the guy showing up with water, like say Smiley sequesters himself 100 times, all he needs is one time for that person not to show up with water for him to be not deterministic, right? Based on the computer's algorithm.
But that's based on 100 prophecies that he's going to drink a water. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like every time, every time he was told something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So if this idea is interesting to you and you'd like to read like a fantasy story that kind of takes that into place, I wanted to plug a book series that I really loved, called the Lycanus trilogy, which is by James Islington, and it's a fantasy series, and there's a lot of like a little bit of time travel. There's a lot of like prophecy and stuff like that. But it really kind of takes that idea, this very question, and kind of explores it. It's you know some of the characters are like basically gods, like they live very very long lives, and it's proven to them. Like this guy comes and basically proves fate to them. He says like, listen, I'm going to tell you this is going to happen, and you have like 100 years. Like figure it out. Like you can do whatever you want. Like there's no way that this won't happen to you. And then he like proves it time and time again until they are like, okay, like I can't disprove this. I've tried over and over to prove, like basically what you're saying. Like you keep giving me these prophecies, and I keep doing everything in my power as like basically a god to prevent this, and it still happens. And so I have to acknowledge that you're right, and I have to believe you. And so like that's kind of a little bit of the foundation of this book, and it's super interesting. It's one of those books that's really enjoyable to read if you like thinking about time travel and fate and destiny and things like that. So I highly recommend it. It's really really worth your time. It's a trilogy. It's good stuff. So
As a you mentioned time travel, I think as a closing thought, I think an interesting future podcast episode that would like I think tie in with this really well is the idea of time travel. I think that one area where time travel breaks down is that idea of like maybe the determinism of time, and like once something has happened, could it be done differently, like, or is it like, has it just happened, and in a timeline. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
we could probably fill an hour on time travel, I expect.
The time travel paradox in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my closing thought.
Yeah, please.
And then the two of you, yes or no. So it sounds like Shy, in the way, and I'm talking about free will in the way that it is most commonly perceived, as in you are responsible and you can make any choice you want throughout the rest of your life, and ultimately where you end up is based off of your choices or whatnot, right? Can we kind of like a loose example of free will? And then the follow-up question to that is, Smiley, you don't believe in that. Shy, you don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. Is that correct for the two of you? So it sounds like that none of us believe in the generic definition of free will.
No, I disagree. I 100% believe that for all practical purposes, we have 100% free will. All of our choices are, we make them. Like the reasons we make them, you could argue that maybe we don't have full accountability, but I think, like I said, that I feel like those inputs are too varied and minute for us to be able to truly track. And so the only way to live your life is to assume that you have full control of yourself and take responsibility for everything you do. So I know that sounds very different from where I started.
It does, and that could lead into a whole different podcast or a whole different, a much longer conversation than we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to be clear, I believe in personal accountability.
This is a great
100%.
closing question. I agree with that as well, and I think that the way I would view it from like a divine aspect is that I think that when God does act, like when he does act to affect people's decisions, like I think historically he's never, like, it's not been shown or it's not written about that he's done that in a way that has been contrary to how that person maybe would have acted in other situations. Maybe just in that situation specifically he nudged or urged or directed. And so I think that we all are responsible for the actions we make.
Yep.
And that's how you feel as well, Van? Or you feel completely absolved of all consequences because you're truly not responsible?
Yeah. Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, I think it's going to align mostly with what you're saying, Smile. I feel like free choice is actually there, right? To pull the trigger or not, to rob the bank or not. But I think ultimately I never had that choice in the first place. But I do think people should still be held responsible for their own actions. So I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but that's the best I can do.
Sometimes that's the best you can do. All right. Well, if you, our fair listener, have a blanking on the word, opinion on whether, we're right. Are we wrong? Are we both right and wrong simultaneously because we're saying two different things? We'd love to hear about it. We'd love to hear your opinions on fate, free will, determinism, whether it's religious, whether it's not. Drop us a line. We're on Twitter at Focus Target, at Focus Target. We're on YouTube, Focus Target Podcast. We have an email account, focustargetpodcast@gmail.com. And, of course, we're streaming live on twitch.tv/Focus Target Podcast. So, episode 90, Focus Target Podcast. Thank you all for being here. I am your host, Smiley.
This is Shy.
And I'm Ben. As always, cover us, Porkins. We're out.